right, 33 minutes after the hour of 12 noon Central Time, where we are. It's 1:33 where Fred Jashevsky is. It's really funny, Fred, that all of a sudden your commercial plays, and here we are talking about all the good things. Fred Jashevsky, by the way, he is a distinguished member of the American Numismatic Association. I know many of you that listen to the show have called him, and are repeat customers, as a matter of fact. We thank you so much for that. Because this guy knows his stuff, and so does his team. And when they're telling you stuff, it's because they're at the forefront of currency knowledge and trends, and they understand what's happening with the economy and how it's going to hell in a handbasket. They understand the fiat currency situation. They understand the leverage in the markets. They understand all this. They understand what it takes to motivate you to spend a minimum of $1,000 every time you pick up that phone. I'm holding the $50 Franklin half in my hot little hand right here, Fred. This is what I believe in more than that fiat currency out there that says Federal Reserve note on it, and half the people don't even know what it is. They think it's a dollar bill.
Yeah, it's really unfortunate that we moved so far away from the concept of gold and silver as a standard of money, and the dilution of information, beyond the dilution of the value of the currency itself. There's sort of been a simultaneous dilution of education, if you will. But yeah, a lot of people can't distinguish the difference. And, that's by design. So, Federal Reserve notes are interesting, but they do include that word note, which we've talked about. If you look up Black's Law Dictionary, the word note, it specifically precludes the idea of money. So it's an IOU. It's, I write on a piece of paper, I owe Dave $100. Well, that's good. But is it money? No, of course not. So, I always harken back to the idea of what really is money, what actually is money. And it always comes back to a physical entity or something backed by something tangible. So since we're not smart enough anymore as a nation to keep Congress in line by forcing them to keep some sort of standard against our monetary system, we have money by edict. We have money created by government that just simply says to us, this has value because, we accept it, we respect it, and you can pay your taxes with it. And nobody thinks twice about accepting it for forms of payment. But I keep finding these strange things every once in a while where people say they don't take cash. And I always just sort of like, really? Wow, are we getting there? Are we really coming to that cashless society we've been talking about for 40 years?
It's happening at the ballparks when people go to the concession stands that are being penalized for using cash.
Yeah, reverse ATMs,
oh my God.
right?
And it's like, my God, the situation is they're trying to make it look like using your credit card is major convenience. I mean, this is how it starts. When they start refusing cash, pretty soon you're going to go to Walmart, you're going to pull out cash, and they go, yeah, we need to see your ID.
Need to see your ID. Yeah, so the reverse ATMs at the ballparks are interesting. You've got to actually put money in. They give you back, let's say, a credit card, a debit card that you can use to buy the hot dog or whatever you want, the peanuts from the vendor, but it costs you 3.5% to do it. So it's actually costing you money to convert your cash into a debit or credit card. That is really bizarre. But, I remember decades ago when my partner was still alive, and as a joke, we used to go to different places and say, hey, do you guys take cash? And it was a joke. Everybody laughed. Nobody thought twice. But today, if you actually ask that question, surprisingly, you actually get a serious response from people as if it's truly an issue. But there's been a war on cash for quite a while because, honestly, we've talked about this, how the government hates the idea of the lack of control when you and I conduct commerce with something they don't see. And if we're doing that with cash, that's invisible. So they would love to see everything converted either to some sort of digital or some sort of credit card. And, I believe that over the decades, I think the whole idea of using paper money is just going to fade away.
I think so too. And the bigger problem is like, I keep reminding people about the time I went through the McDonald's drive-thru and I asked the clerk, do you take Federal Reserve notes? Just a minute. I got to go ask my manager. And I'm like, okay, you obviously didn't learn anything in high school. Checkbook 101. I mean, you didn't learn anything, did you?
You missed that class.
Oh my God. They don't. I mean, I don't know what's with these kids. And of course, the manager comes back with we accept Federal Reserve notes. And the look I got is, what are you, smart ass? Yeah. I said, look, obviously you did not understand. You didn't learn this stuff in high school. Your manager knows, but you don't. I said, look at what it says on the top of the dollar bill, a note. It's a promise to pay. Folks, we're dealing in a fiat currency system, and what Fred says is gold. And speaking of which, he deals in gold. He's a numismatic trader. and he looks for deals. You still have some of those St. Gaudens around?
I do. I always try to carry some of those in inventory. In fact, if anybody calls us today, I could put together something really cool because we've been buying aggressively on any of the little dips that have occurred in the price of gold as we've been moving forward, because it has jumped very rapidly this year. So anytime we get a pullback, to me, is a buying opportunity. I do see an awful lot of potential issues on the horizon, and I am getting worried about the banking system as a whole. Although, normally I'm worried about inflation, and we've almost had a bit of, I guess, almost good luck, if you want to call it that, in the sense that inflation has been so visible. It's been impossible for even average people to ignore. But they can see it, they feel it, they experience it. But there are a lot of times, and sometimes it's years at a time, where inflation is being created, but we're not experiencing it on a day-to-day basis because there's a lag time. So, first we print all the money, then it circulates through the economy, then it inflates itself through the value of pushing more money into an economy, and then eventually that turns into higher prices. So by the time it gets to the end of that, where the prices have gone up, it's after the fact. So the problem has been created a while back. So I always pay attention to the supply of money and how rapidly that's increasing. Now, the Fed got very tricky a few years ago and realized that a lot of us were paying attention. They used to call us monetarists. We used to follow the Fed. And we used to look at how much money they printed every quarter, every month. We'd go to the Federal Reserve accounting data. It's called FRED, believe it or not. Federal Reserve Economic Data, and you could pull that up on your website, and you'll look at the bond holdings and how much additional money's been created, look at the bond sales that have occurred in the last couple months, and we could count how much money there was in M1, M2, and M3. Well, then the Fed stopped producing the numbers because they did not want the public to keep following this, because a few people had caught on and were making these things public, and the Fed was saying, well, if you bury it in a bunch of statistics, nobody picks up on it. But if people were actually finding it out and making that information public, well, we have to go back and maybe make it a little more complicated. So the first thing they did is they stopped reporting M3. They just said, we're not going to report that anymore. We don't care. Everything is about M1 and M2. Well, okay. So you can't follow the whole trail. Now you have to do some math. You have to add up things and look at columns and compare them to a month ago. So it gets a little difficult. But I do believe the inflation problem comes from the creation of the capital. So that's the point I'd like to pay attention to. Have we been printing more money, and what is the likelihood going forward of the government's need to print additional capital?
Well, see, and there's this other likelihood too, and that's to go all digital. And see, we have the DTCC and Seed and Company, and I know you know about them because every single credit transaction that is done anywhere in the United States of America is recorded with the Depository Trust Corporation.
Absolutely. And this is what they want. So their push towards this digital currency, again, I believe what you've said is that they will use the convenience angle to support the idea that this is why we should do this. And unfortunately, I have a feeling most Americans are going to buy it. They're going to agree and say, oh, yeah, that makes sense to me. It'll be more proficient and everything will work more smoothly. But the problem is that we lose the ability to count capital if it goes digital. I mean, we can still count paper money now. We can count how many $100 bills have been printed. How do you count digital notes? How do we know when they've hit that computer key and added more of them into the supply? We have no control over that. And of course, the loss of financial privacy is stunning, because if you think it's bad now, wait till they're at a point where every single transaction, from buying a pack of bubble gum at the supermarket to purchasing a home, everything is going to be visible, which means it'll all be taxed. And of course, if they want to start social engineering people based upon the way they spend the money, they're going to have all that information at their disposal. I find all this very disheartening.
Well, and see, what I see in the future, if they went to something like that, you would see bankruptcies being filed in record numbers because people would be stifled, couldn't pay their bills in time. There would be no way to survive, no way to buy food. They'd be forced to file bankruptcy. And then you'd have this massive takeover of property in the United States of America by the banking institutions that were already having a hard time trusting. because I'm dealing with foreclosures almost every day. I'm working on at least multiple cases every week, working for attorneys across the country, consulting them on cases. But this situation right here, we were just talking about before we went to the break, the FDIC. I had mentioned that there were, at last check, 65 banks that are, kind of on the brink, are teetering on the brink of insolvency. And you said that figure's higher?
I think it's much higher. I think there are as many as several hundred that are facing that kind of problem. Now, Janet Yellen is well aware of this, but she's been keeping it rather quiet because the last thing they want to do is to scare the public into any kind of bank run. So if you remember how quickly last spring, the few banks that did fell. It happened rapidly, and it cost a huge amount of money and pretty much dented the supply of revenue. So the FDIC, of course, has its pool. So each institutional bank is required to fund the insurance pool if you're an FDIC member. And that pool is supposed to be reserved for the individual banks that fail to cover the insurance policy, to cover the accounts. Now, they have agreed to say that we've moved this to $250,000 per account. The problem, though, is let's say you have more than $250,000. Number one, you need more than one account. Number two, you can't have more than, let's say, 4 accounts, even if they're different types, like a CD or a checking account. After that, you need another institution. After that, you might need another legal entity. You might have to actually create like an LLC just to get a separate tax ID number to give you the additional ability to have a separate account that's also insured. So the FDIC has got a pool, but how quickly will that pool be eroded?
Yeah.
So what they've done now since 1933, before the FDIC existed, 9,000 banks failed in the Great Depression. 9,000 banks. Every one of the people that had money in those accounts lost it all. There was no insurance then. So if your bank went under, you were beat. That was it. End of the line. They instituted the FDIC after that, and it pretty much resolved the problem. Only about 9 banks failed in 1934. So it definitely helped the position. But the problem is that the FDIC is backed by government bonds. In other words, they're operating the fiat money system the same way the Federal Reserve is with these paper notes. We are banking on the credit of the U.S. to stand behind the FDIC if their pool is depleted. And I think they will make good on those issues. I think if you have money in your account and the FDIC can't handle the amount, they'll print the money necessary to cover you. But to me, that's its own problem, is if so many banks fail that the FDIC pool is depleted, and we're forced now to rely on this backing of the government. So what are they going to do? They're going to print billions and billions and billions of dollars to pay out everybody who lost money in these accounts to make sure that they're secure. But what have they done to the value of the money then? They've inflated the crap out of it. So, it's a good news, bad news thing. Yeah, we're backed by the government with FDIC insurance, but what does that really provide for us? So I really believe people need to take a second look at, especially if you have larger amounts of money, is it really well protected under the current system? And would you be better off owning something physical like gold or silver to comprise a portion of what you're putting away for wealth protection? Because if I own those gold and silver coins, you have your Franklin half dollars, I don't care what happens to the Bank of the Ozarks. They go under, my gold and silver coin is still standing there in my hands and still retains its value. So I don't think people should look at this and say, we shouldn't have any money at all in the banking industry. But I think if you do, you need wealth protection, counterbalance it with something physical. I think that's essential for everybody, no matter what kind of money you have.
Right. And see, now we brought up Bank of the Ozarks, and I don't mean to pick on them because the fact they're not members of the MERS system, and they seem to be fairly well. I've actually met the CEO from the bank, so I know how good. Oh, yeah. I know how they don't like to play those kind of dangerous games. And so you were commenting before, Fred, about the fact that the people who were probably more than likely to lose out on this are the ones that are holding all this commercial paper. Yes, because the commercial shoe is starting to drop now.
That seems to be where the problem is focused now within the banking system, is on those that have made commercial loans. So with the commercial real estate values dropping, you have an inevitable problem. If you've loaned $1 billion against $1 billion worth of real estate that goes down in value to $800 million, well, the bank is either going to ask you to put up more money to cover the difference or call in the loan. And that's a real problem. But if those banks who've made those loans can't recover the payments because the people that have taken the loans have gone into default, now the bank has the exposure. And after a while, if the bank has too many of these kinds of outstanding loans that are not being repaid, well, that's when the bank itself can go under. And again, we're hoping the FDIC will step in and say, don't worry, Dave, you had money in your checking account. The bank has no money, but the FDIC is going to write you a check. But, they can take time to do that.
Yeah.
I don't know that a lot of people know that there's no requirement for them to do this within 7 days or 30 days.
That's right.
Technically, they could stretch it out for 30 years if they needed to. And you're just stuck waiting for them to come up with the capital. So if you've got to make payments on bills coming up next month and the FDIC can't step in quickly enough, you're screwed.
My understanding is they could literally pay you $1 a year until you're fully compensated. Is that, I heard rumors from people saying the FDIC is insolvent, that these people aren't worth the paper they're printed on, just like everything the U.S. government underwrites. If the whole system is propped up on fiat, we don't have a lot of positive hope for our future, do we?
No. And again, I see the only solution is to print money, and that's what they'll do because it's expedient, it solves the problem, and what it does is it dilutes the value of money, but it creates a system where they can at least solve the short-term problem and basically screw the public over by devaluing the currency, which is their, technique of choice. And I find that they're using that more and more often. It's the default. So, yeah, we'll print our way out of the problem. That's all well and good, but you're killing my money. And I had to work hard to earn that dollar last year. Not buying me the same as it is. Somebody pointed out that I think it was 1994, $1 million is now, it takes about $2 million to buy what $1 million did in 1994. The time frame that it takes for money to be cut in half is accelerating. And I've heard estimates as quick as 5 years from now that we could lose as much as 50% of the purchasing power of money if we continue along the strides we are now, both because of the increasing rate at which government is deficit spending and the rising interest payments on the debt, and the potential for any of these problems to kick in and create this need to print money. And I'm kind of like putting together a list, I feel like David Letterman, my top 10 reasons why the government's going to have to print money. Number 10, fiscal crisis in the banking system. Number 9, government deficit spending. Number 8, interest payments on the debt, and I can.
Number 7, kick the can down the road. Number 6, hey, just throw money at it.
That's definitely up there in the top 5, right? So we're coming into a political year, and we don't know how they're going to address this. The last time Trump was president, he blew out the deficit by creating a tax cut, and it added literally trillions of dollars to the deficit. But it solved the short-term problem of generating activity in the economy. So politically, it's going to be important who wins this election.
No doubt. Eric in Missouri, you have a question for Fred Deshefsky. Go ahead.
Yeah, you're talking about trying to get your money insured in a bank because I guess once you deposit it, kind of turns into stock and whenever they get in trouble. What if you had cash and safe box in the bank? Can they still have access to that?
No.
Should the bank fail?
No, that's a really important question. And the truth is that whatever is in a safety deposit box does not belong to the bank. So it is not considered part of the bank's assets. So if the bank fails, it does not impact what's in a safety deposit box. And, technically, if the bank, quote unquote, closes, they don't really physically close the doors. If they do, it's maybe a day or two. They reopen and you would be able to get into your safety deposit box and get out whatever you have in there.
So the danger of this
since they're not paying interest anyway,
yeah,
that'd be the way to go.
Of course not.
Yeah, we appreciate your call, Eric. See, the downside of the banking system right now is that this currency that's out there right now is not backed by gold or silver, which is one of the reasons why Fred comes on this show periodically to discuss the nature of the economy and what's going on right now and the kind of investment you need to be making right now. Like I am doing this right now, which is why I have people calling me on my personal phone asking me questions about the quantity and the amount and $1,000 face value per person for every member in your household. As far as the value of what like junk silver, which I'm a big believer in. I don't really hold much gold because I just, in my mind, It's going to be a very difficult commodity to trade with somebody unless they realize, and you can find somebody that understands the value of that gold piece and says, okay, I will take that gold piece and give you, because I know what this is worth, and I have a car I want to sell. I will take the gold piece for that car because I think my car is worth about what that gold piece is worth. So, I mean, you have to find somebody that will understand the value of gold. Would that be a fair statement, Fred?
Oh, sure. I mean, I always looked at it in the sense that the larger amounts of money trade that way. So you might trade a handful of gold coins for a home or a car, as you pointed out. If it comes down to conducting day-to-day commerce, I think the simplicity of silver is going to speak for itself. And I, too, agree that gold would be less useful than silver if we get to this complete collapse. Now, I have made an awful lot of strong statements about my lack of faith in paper money, but believe it or not, along with that, I do believe its existence will remain. It'll still survive, just looking much weaker. So instead of the dollar becoming worthless, I see it becoming worth less. So I don't think we'll actually end up having to spend gold or silver coins technically to buy goods and services. If it ever gets that bad, I mean, consider the anarchy that I mean, how would the world work if you can't spend a dollar? Because that means nobody else can either. How do we buy the goods and services that we import? How do we pay the bondholders? How do we pay out insurance payments? Everything would have to change, and that would become ridiculously problematic. But,
well, it would, yeah.
But for those people that are thinking about it in normal everyday terms, yeah, there's no question that silver coins will perform much smoother and much easier for an average person conducting regular commerce, if that's your goal. And that's why I love, and again, I hate the expression, but the junk silver coins. So the pre-1965 U.S. silver dimes, quarters, and half dollars that are actually made of silver. They can never make another one of these things. So it's a great way to hold wealth. They do appreciate value. You can sell them in small and large quantities. But I do encourage people to accumulate that as a product.
There you have it. And you can call 800-878-2646 and get more information. He deals in $1,000 increments, folks. So, look at your accounts and stock up. Fred Dashevsky, thanks so much for being on the show once again. We'll talk soon.